or you can certainly, I'll be talking to Mr. Fry, who will be in the office on Thursday, about some additional funding that will need to come forward, so we certainly could take this request and look to come back at our February 8th meeting with a recommendation. Your choice.
What would y'all like to do on this? Wait till February 8th?
As long as he's not, I mean, they're not just for me.
This is a prepared deal here. It's not something, we have the rescue engine now, has all the stuff we're looking at doing here. This is a redundancy, so to speak. So another strategy behind that is there will be another request coming to you, I believe related to the sheriff's department, that will probably be a contingency request. As you know, it doesn't matter if it's a penny or whatever, contingency funds is board approval. So you may be able to take that up. I'm sure you're gonna wanna ask at that time, where does our balance of contingency and where would this leave us? So that's why I'm suggesting the 8th, that's 2 weeks out. I don't think it'll be that much impact.
Anybody else have questions for Brian or Mr. Weekly? You wanna wait until February 8th and come back to this and go from there? Get a little more information on some things by then, Brian?
Sure, we'll get a shopping list together, see exactly what we're looking at, and, we'll have an idea.
Very good.
Brian, I'll reach out when Bobby gets back.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
All right, budget summary, FY 22. Michelle?
Mr. Chairman, Michelle will be giving the presentation. We do have Mr. Fry on the line as well.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. Just to go over what's before you and in your packets, where we are currently with revenues right now. Year to date, we're right about 56%. Expenditures are at 46%. Barely over, we're in good shape. I'm sorry, keep saying.
One moment, point of order, Mr. Chairman. For those who are online, if you're not speaking, please mute your devices or microphones on those devices. Thank you.
You can see the year-to-date actuals for revenue. We've gotten in a little over $11 million, and then expenditures are in good shape as well. I'm not sure you're not moving through that, so there you go. Everybody else here can't see it either. On over to capital projects. Capital project fund includes all debt finance projects for the county and the schools, as well as non-debt finance projects for the county. And there's not a whole lot going on right now. Everything is paid up. We've had the primary school and the renovations. Everything's taken care of up to date.
Michelle, hold on one sec. Card?
Oh, no, Michelle, I just thought, it'd be good, the notes that you put at the bottom of these things are very explanatory. I don't know whether the public can see that or what you might
No,
want
they
to
can't.
just read, can you read those?
Sure. We're back at the general fund. If you want to stay on that page, or the budget expenditures are primary for completion of the admin building. The completion, like I just said, the primary school, everything's renovations are taken care of for this year. The fiscal year expected expenditures for the public radio system is.
Michelle, can we go back to the, I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's
Can we go back to
okay.
the notes for
That's what I was gonna do.
the first
He was on
slide?
the first one, yeah.
Yeah,
You're on page 2. I need to.
underneath the general fund, page 5.
Okay.
Yeah, page 5, the general funds.
So you do want me on page 5?
Please.
Okay. Not a problem. So we're on the total funds. The FY 22 budget projects, at the end of the fund balance, all the funded balance is $20 million. Actually, year-to-date transactions show the fund balance at $25 million. I can probably read it better, I'm having a hard time reading on this.
This is back in the general fund.
So
I
you're
had it
back
right.
on one.
Yeah, so
I'm
the
so
page
confused.
5 is up top, so the general fund on this note is basically, you received some ARPA funds of the 2 million that was budgeted, which we actually will receive 2.5. You have about almost 1.3 received, so this is still the general fund. I'm sorry, I brought him back, because page 5 is at the top, is actually page 105.
Okay, yeah, it had the page numbers at the bottom, so I'm sorry. You told me you wanted it on page 5,
Yeah, I
so
apologize.
that's okay. So we, currently where we are,
Let's go to 205.
you want 205. This is just the capital budget. It might be better for the folks to see the numbers as opposed to read the words on, there you go. So they can see where we are with revenues and expenditures. And if you come down just a tad bit too, actually go up, I guess is what I need to tell you to do. Go up to the top of the page. There you go. So they can see it going across there, the budget, the year-to-date actuals, and the percentage. That's what I'm trying to show for the,
We're all zero on those.
we're all on zero,
So
yes.
go down to the capital project outlay, at the expenditures that were at 11.95%. Go from there, I guess, Michelle.
Okay. We have the remaining balance of $510,000 of the budget expenditures are set aside for the asset replacement and repairs for vehicles, facility repairs and IT equipment, and software, so.
So you basically, of your 3 million budgeted for your capital, you only expended, as you can see, 600 some thousand, so you had the bulk of your capital still remaining. Your school, primary school closeout's very close, and some of you are on the CIP committee with the schools. The school's supposed to receive their last invoice, which is gonna leave bond proceeds about 621K, for you to consider. So our projects overall, I wanna say your numbers are good, but Brian has a radio project getting ready to kick off with a tower at Hoover Ridge, followed by a tower out at the Hughes River site out in Nethers. So while it looks good now, we will manage those projects, but that's why you're really favorable right now. I'm sure. Sorry, Michelle.
No, that's okay. We have the school funds. You wanna go to page 4? There you go. School funds, that includes all the school operating funds, the school food service, school non-debt capital projects, textbooks, and Armstrong scholarship. So, right now, the revenues for them are at 39%, and they have not realized, and gotten in all their funding. So, that's the reason that one's a little bit skewed right now. And on page 5, for the all funds total, revenues were at 51%, you can see right there. And then, expenditures were only at 46, so you go down just a tad bit right there. So overall, we are in fairly good shape for this year, for fiscal year 22.
It also kind of shows that permits and privilege, fees and regulatory licensing, we know the building, department, the building and zoning has been fairly busy, and that has to reflect that
Very much
specifically.
so, yes.
So our personal property, out of our revenue sources for the county, I mean, they exceeded, probably by about $300,000. We're ahead of what was budgeted. I think it was 3.2, so we're ahead by $300,000. real estate, we're about 52%, so where you expect to be half year, we do real estate twice a year. As Michelle just pointed out, though, the school is a little bit low. It doesn't mean that they're not gonna receive this. I know I spoke to Mr. Jewett about this earlier. The sales tax and some of those items just not have been, I'm gonna say booked. Maybe they've received it, they just haven't booked it or sent that to finance because there is a separation between their finance and our finance. But we are looking at that. Hopefully their basic school aid and sales tax come in. But on the county side, for your real estate and your personal property, you're on track, or if not, really doing very well. So overall, the takeaway is that you've expended less than what you have in revenues currently.
What else would you like to point out, Michelle?
That's pretty much it. Everything's in good shape right now.
All right. Bobby, do you have, I know you're watching, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I'll make a couple of points. I just wanna reiterate, and if you go to the bottom of each page, you'll see a fund balance at the beginning of the year and a fund balance projected at the end of this update. And basically, I guess the main thing to take away from this update is that currently we had budgeted to use about 4.7 million of fund balance. And a lot of that money was for capital. But overall, so far, we have actually added to fund balance. So what that means is a couple things. Some of it's a timing difference, meaning we probably are gonna spend more money on our capital projects. And that number might, change by the end of June. But also, I do think it shows that we probably under budgeted our revenues for the year. And we're probably going to end up, exceeding a lot of those estimates on our revenue side. And on the expenditure side, I think it still shows that we're saving money compared to what we had, budgeted, for the entire year. So I think that you guys are in great shape. Cash flow is running just about the same as what you see for year-to-date net change and fund balance. So we're collecting as we spend, we're not dipping, and Stephanie, if she's still on the line, can chime in, but I don't think we're dipping into, our cash. So overall, I think everything is great at this point. And like I said, I expect overall to come in a lot better than what we, budgeted, which was a 4.7 million usage of fund balance. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions if you have any.
All right, does anybody have any questions for Michelle or Bob?
No, sir.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Bobby, thank you again.
Thank you, have a good evening.
You as well. All right, Lauren, tell us about the voting precinct.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, before you got here, I've listened.
oh, you have a mock public hearing?
Okay.
Listen, it sounds like a good plan,
Yeah.
I'm with you. That's right on the money.
Please, Lauren.
All right, good evening. I'm here today on behalf of the voter registration office and part of the Madison County Electoral Board to recommend the consolidation of two voting precincts. Grace Mill and Wolftown is what we would like to combine. A little background on it is the Grace Mill voting precinct has 88 registered voters, 2 of them are listed as inactive. In November's 2021 election, 58 people voted at Graves Mill and cast their ballot in person on election day, and 8 people voted early, either by mail or in my office here. Despite them having a smaller number of voters, the polling place itself still has minimum requirements that we have to meet, including the same voting equipment that's at every other polling place, a minimum of 3 officers of election, and all the supplies, election materials, and etc. Code of Virginia 24.2-307 states that a minimum of 100 voters is required to because of this. Our only point in stating that was if we were trying to create Graves Mill today, it wouldn't be possible to do it. However, nothing says that this has to be done. The Graves Mill polling place is located at the Graves Chapel. It's at 104 Bluff Mountain Road, and the Wolftown polling place is at Rapidan Baptist Church, 150 Rapidan Church Lane. We mapped it out, and they're 6 miles apart, and says that it's a 10-minute driving distance per MapQuest. The fiscal impact of consolidating these precincts would save the county $540 per election in officer of election fees and $150 per election in rental fees for the building, which would total $1,380 annually, because typically every year we do have a minimum of 2 elections. Due to the new requirements for early voting results, the registrar office or the central absentee precinct does need a second machine. The cost of this machine is about $10,000 by the time we would have a scanner, and everything that needs to go with it to get it started. And the consolidation of one precinct would allow us to basically recycle that equipment that's there and put it into our office. To clarify that a little bit, because I know Mr. Smith touched on it, we have a machine for every precinct right now, which is 9, and then 1 for the early voting precinct, and we also have 2 spares. The spares come into use if something happens on election day, like the machine's not reading, or they drop it setting it up that morning and shatter it, or something like that. There's always 2 spares. But last year, as of 2021, we had to start mandatory pre-processing, and because the parties want to know how their voters are voting and how the results are coming in, both by mail and in person, we have to tabulate those separate, which has never happened before until last November's election. Because of that, that's why we need 2 separate machines in the cap, and that was updated in code section 24.2-709.1. It speaks about how we have to hold mandatory pre-processing, and when we enter results, we only have the option now to put them in as by mail, early voting, and then there's also a post-election section, because we can take them for 3 days afterwards. So that's just to clarify that a little bit. So we're not going to be out of machines, but by the absentee precinct having to use 2, it really only puts us down to 1 spare. So, you know, if Wolftown's machine breaks down and then 6 hours later Brightwood's machine malfunctions, we're hand counting. And I know that was brought up a couple times earlier, but if you cut on the news at all whatsoever, you know that elections are at the top of the news. You see everything about it when something goes wrong. Look at the presidential election in 2020, for example. It's all you heard about. I just don't think hand counting is something that we ever want to have to do or address, because look at your risk of error there. It's not something that I would want to put on the county. I wouldn't feel comfortable with, 3 or 4 election officials having to hand count ballots, and we may not ever need 2 backup machines at the same time, but it's the minimum that the voting machine company recommends, and it's what we've always had until November. The implementation of doing this is covered in code section 24.2-129. It also states that no changes can be made within 60 days of an election, which is why we kind of got this on the agenda, so that we could go ahead and get it started if it is something the Board of Supervisors wants to pursue. We would have to have everything done and moving forward by April 22nd. Just to summarize a little bit, you guys do also have 2 options if it's something that you want to pursue. You can do kind of what we're doing now, where we have a public hearing for 30 days and public comment, and then there's an additional 30-day waiting period, and if you voted yes and decided to do this, then I would handle everything after that point. We would basically just have to remove the 1 line between Graves Mill and Wolftown and change Graves Mill voters to the Wolftown precinct. Your other option is you can also obtain a certification of no objection. That goes to the Office of the Attorney General, and just depending on how quick they get to that in the office and sign off on it or don't sign off on it, it would be approved or not approved, and you would not have to do any other type of process. Just to go back and summarize, some of our main points for doing this were the savings of the $540 in election official fees, the $150 in the facility rentals, savings of about $10,000 for the new voting equipment if we don't consolidate because we'll need extra equipment at that point. Reallocation of other election materials such as spare equipment like our poll pads that we have. We don't have any of those spares, so that would give us 2 in case of other malfunctions. The reduced number of election officials or being able to use them in other places that they might be more needed. And another strong point is that there's no cell phone service at Graves Mill and no landline, so we borrow a radio from the sheriff's office, and that's our only means of communication with them on election day. So if their equipment malfunctions or they run out of ballots or, something serious happens, the radio's the only method that we have, but it's not always great. Sometimes it's hard to communicate or get clear messages. I know that Graves Mill means a lot to a lot of people, and it's such a nice precinct, such a nice area. I totally understand, but I do think that it's my job to come to you guys with what I think is best for our office. And in my opinion, I think that this is something the county should pursue, especially now as we're in the process of redistricting, because it's the best time to do it. You guys could look into redrawing lines like Mr. Lewis noted earlier. That's definitely something that we want to do right now, but the consolidation of this one, Graves Mill has 88 registered voters. Our next smallest precinct is Etland. They have 542. So that's just to give you a little insight there of going from the smallest to the next smallest. You're talking 400 and some people. It's not even close to anything else that we have. Not to mean that these people aren't important. Every vote's important and every vote counts, and that's my job, to make sure of that. But we do also have 45 days of no excuse early voting in our office, where 30% of the county consistently votes early in person. And we also have by mail voting. So if someone, doesn't want to travel out of Graves Mill, they do have the option for me to mail it to them. That's always been an option. But 30% of the county is voting with me before election day even comes. So I think those numbers, are pretty big themselves. Mr. Graves was right. Graves Mill always has the highest voter turnout. They've got 75% for last November, and the next closest one was Etland, who had 71%. So they do always have great turnout. That's never been in question. It's just the same things required for a much smaller amount of people, and I think those sources could be better utilized elsewhere.
Traditionally, on items similar to this, we get like an official letter from in this case, it would be the electoral board.
Yes.
Is there plans to get us one of these letters?
So the electoral board met last week, and I had 2 who voted yes to pursue this and 1 who did not vote because the 2 yeses already kind of.
There's 3 people on the electoral
It is,
board?
yeah.
That's all that's on there?
That's it. Yes, sir.
There you go.
So they're on board. I'm happy to have them write something and sign it. If you guys want that, we've got a board meeting coming up again next week, so we can take care of that.
Anybody have questions for Lauren before we open it up to the mock?
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
it
please.
was at least based on a vote. It was at least based on a vote. You certainly can bring a recommendation letter if so you wish that we could call that vote. The other option, I think she may touch on, just to reemphasize, the other route, if it wanted to be considered, I'm not leaning one way or the other, but would be to obtain a certificate of no objection from the Office of Civil Rights within the Office of the Attorney General. When we first discussed this, I had suggested bring it to this body because your voters are closest to you versus the Attorney General. So just for clarity purposes.
All right.
And the certification of no objection is kind of a quicker route typically, since this is a minimum of 60 days, because we've got 30 days of public comment and then a 30-day wait period. So that's more of the reason of using that one. But we have time for either if it's something you want to pursue.
So Lauren, who started this process, or the electoral board was looking at this, or is this where it came from?
Yeah, so the redistricting is going on better, but I think, that's something the Board of Supervisors is responsible for if you want to make any changes to that. If you don't, we still, because of the district changes, have to mail out new voter letters to every registered voter and things like that, which is why I was trying to handle it now before we send them a letter for the redistrict and then send them a new one if we consolidate precincts, just to not cause confusion.
Well, I've talked to a fair amount of residents from Grace
Mhm.
Hill, and everyone I talked to is opposed to closing that precinct.
Yes.
Not only because it's, it's historical, but
Sure.
because, they do have a high voter percentage.
Mhm.
And $1,300 is not so much to spend
Right,
on an
correct,
election. Now, I
yeah,
know if you have to buy your voting machine, that's another story.
right, yeah,
And, Republicans are constantly accused of trying to make it hard for people to vote. And I don't care whether you're Republican or Democrat, I don't wanna make it hard for people to vote.
sure,
So, my thinking is, I think we ought to leave it as it is.
okay. Yeah, that's completely understandable. I think some of our reasoning was just the short distance, you're only talking 6 miles of travel